What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kaylee. This is Healthy, Fit, and Saved, and today I'm coming at you with 5 tips to help you sleep better. Now, I have suffered from insomnia probably since I was like 19 or 20 years old, so almost for 10 years, which is a long time to deal with insomnia, to deal with sleep disturbances. It's not fun. If you are watching this video, it's probably because you aren't the best sleeper, and so you understand the pain and the suffering that comes with not being able to sleep regularly. You're cranky, you're tired, you feel lethargic, you feel bloated, you crave certain foods. Like, it's just not good. Fortunately, in the last couple of years, I have changed my lifestyle basically completely. I've changed my diet, I've changed my exercise, I've changed the way I sleep, I've changed the way that I manage my stress, everything, to try and sleep better. And so I wanted to come at you guys and just share with you guys some of the tips and tricks that I have done and implemented in my life over the last 5 years to improve my sleep. Now, I emphasize 5 years because I don't want you guys to think that, just like with a diet, I don't want you to think that you can do one thing and it's going to change everything, right? I don't want you to think, when you're trying to lose weight, for instance, that you can just take a fat burning pill and that's going to solve all your problems. And similarly with sleep, I don't want you to think that you can do one of these tricks one night and then boom, like your sleep is improved. But what I want you to do is to take these tips with a grain of salt. Remember that I'm not a clinician, so I can't prescribe you anything. If you do want to be prescribed something like a sleep hygiene regimen or sleeping pills, I highly recommend, caveat, that you don't go with sleeping pills. Like, that's not your first resort. It should be your last resort. Sleeping pills, prescription or over the counter, are very, very dangerous if you become dependent on them over time. We don't know the long-term effects, but there's a lot of neurodegeneration that can occur. There's a ton of research out there right now that's looking at longitudinal studies that shows that people who take medications like this for a long period of time might be at an increased risk of things like Alzheimer's. So you don't want to take these lightly, right? So when you go to your doctor, of course you should ask them how you can improve your sleep, and they're going to give you some lifestyle tips and tricks and things like that, but they might also prescribe you or offer to prescribe you some sort of sleeping pill. I would highly recommend that you try every single thing that you possibly can before going to those pills. So I just want to share this with you guys because it's just personal information that has helped me over the last 5 years, and I hope to help you as well. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. So the first tip that I have for you is to get outside more often. We need to see the sun. Our bodies run on something called a circadian rhythm, and it's a little bit different for everyone, but it's basically our body's biological clock. There are things that our body secretes, like hormones and neurotransmitters, to help us wake up. Those would be things like cortisol. And then similarly, there's things that our body secretes to help us, like, kind of signal to our brain and to our body that it's time to go to bed, like melatonin, for instance. When we are deficient in vitamins, our bodies don't produce neurotransmitters and hormones like they should. And so we get sleep disturbances, we might get weight gain, we might get mood fluctuations, all of these things start to happen. When you don't get enough sleep, chances are you are going to be vitamin D deficient. And that's because the #1 way that we can get vitamin D into our system is by being in the sun. This is why most doctors and nutritionists, dietitians will prescribe or tell people that they need to take a vitamin D supplement. I, for one, take a vitamin D supplement because it just makes life easier. But actually, like, having your eyes view the sun is a really good way to kind of regulate that circadian rhythm, to regulate our body's biological clock and to help us sleep better. So this was actually proven by Mosca Guri et al. In 2018, and I know I'm not pronouncing his name right because he's Italian, but anyways, he looked at associations between sleep disturbances and sleep quality and people's vitamin D levels in their blood. And what he found was that there was a really significant relationship between our vitamin D levels and the prevalence of disturbances in our sleep and our sleep quality in general. So what do you need to do? Well, I would say, first of all, consider taking a vitamin D supplement because you're probably very deficient in vitamin D, just like I was. But I would also say to get outside more often. Go for walks, walk to work, walk to school, walk in the parking lot, go just sit outside instead of sitting in your break room, and eat lunch outside. Like, just get outside. I'm saying this and I'm like the whitest I've ever been, so, you know, pot calling the kettle black. All right, #2, and this is definitely related to #1, avoiding blue light screens. So blue light essentially is like artificial sunlight to our eyeballs, and it can come from things like our phones, our computers, and our TV. I don't have to tell you how long and how many hours you spend on your phone, on your computer, watching TV all day long. So combining that with the fact that you're not getting enough sunlight, your body just doesn't really understand like what's night and what's day. Because blue light stimulates the sun, when you think about it, you come home from work, the sun is down, that means that your body is starting to, or at least trying to, produce those neurotransmitters and hormones that tell our body to go to bed. However, instead of reading or going to sleep earlier or talking to your loved one or meditating or journaling, we go on our phones and we go on our computers and we watch TV and we play video games and we do all these things and we expose our light or our eyes to blue light. Essentially what that does is it tells our body, hey, it's still daytime, so I need you to produce more cortisol and not go to sleep. So there are things that you can do obviously to avoid this, of course, because technology is in our lives. I'm using technology right now. I use it every single day in my research, so it's unavoidable. It's not like we can just like throw our computers in the trash and be like, be gone, blue light screens. But what we can do is use things like blue light glasses, which you can get on Amazon for like $10 or $15. I actually got a new prescription and you can put the blue light lens on your prescription glasses, which is awesome because most of us wear glasses at night. And then also just avoiding screens 2 to 3 hours before bed is optimal if you can do it. This is actually proven in 2017 by Moran et al. There was a huge link between somebody looking at a blue light before they go to sleep and the quality of their sleep, and also the delayed time to go to sleep, which essentially means that instead of it taking you 10 or 20 minutes to fall asleep, it takes you 2 or 3 hours. All right, tip number 3 is one of my favorites because you guys know I love the gut microbiome. I think your gut is very important, and this is just another example of how it is so important. I'm telling you guys, poop is important. So essentially, our gut microbiome is just all the bacteria and metabolites and inflammatory markers that make up our gut, and there are a ton of them. Like there are billions and billions and billions of bacteria. You think that you have a lot of cells in your body, you have like 3 times the amount of bacteria in your body. It's crazy. It's bananas. Really cool about our gut microbiome is that it actually produces neurotransmitters, hormones, and inflammatory markers. It can send those neurotransmitters and those hormones all around our body, and it basically essentially like governs everything. It governs like the world. One of the issues with that is that if you have disruptions in your gut, which could be referred to as a leaky gut or dysbiosis, then those neurotransmitters aren't being produced like they should, and they're not being communicated to the brain. So those would be things like dopamine, serotonin, GABA, etc. When those neurotransmitters are not produced sufficiently, then it can also disrupt our sleep. It can disrupt things like our mood, anxiety, depression. And so your gut is really important. So one of the things that obviously you guys know I've done in the last couple of years is to talk to a naturopathic doctor, someone who's a clinician, but can sit down with you and go over your diet and go over your blood markers and go over stool samples and things like that and see what's going on in your gut. Because a lot of times people are eating foods that are causing these like inflammatory, kind of like aggravating responses, and then in turn they're not producing those neurotransmitters like they should, and they're not getting the sleep that they should. I can't give you anything more specific than that, like as far as recommendations and stuff go, because everyone is so different and our gut microbiomes are so different, which makes it really cool, but it also makes it really complex. So you definitely want to talk to a doctor. Just looking into like some healing gut foods and things like that is obviously really important, like taking a probiotic. You could do apple cider vinegar or like lemon water. I'm trying to think of other things. Eating lots of vegetables, eating lots of fiber, all of those things are just going to help anybody, I think. And so you could start there and then go and see a doctor when you have the time. All right, so tip number 4, we're going to get sciencey, and I'm going to love it. Don't eat a big meal right before you go to sleep. And particularly, don't eat a heavy meal right before you go to sleep. So by big, I mean the amount of food, and by heavy, I mean like if it has a lot of fat and starches and salts and sugars, like you know what I'm talking about. If you're gonna eat like a milkshake and a burger and fries right before you go to sleep, chances are you're not gonna sleep very well. But the question is, why does that happen? So Crosby et al. In 2019 found that when people eat big amounts of food, like it doesn't have to be right around bedtime, but when they eat a lot of food, and when they eat any food in general, our body secretes insulin. So essentially what insulin does is it pulls out glucose from our bloodstream. So we break down the food, then the sugar goes into our bloodstream. The insulin gets secreted by your pancreas, and it pulls that sugar out of our bloodstream, and then it goes to like our muscles, our liver, our brain, all of those things. That process also stimulates some growth factors. So those growth factors would include things like IGF, which is insulin growth factor 1. Pretty simple, growth factor, insulin growth factor. Do you get it? So what IGF-1 does is it essentially helps our muscles to grow. It does a lot of other things too, because it can also help like fat grow and things like that. Mainly it helps our muscles grow. So let's say we eat sugar, insulin pulls that sugar out of the blood. It needs to go into our muscles because our muscles have stored sugar called glycogen, and IGF-1 is a huge factor in making sure that that happens. That whole process though kind of disrupts our sleep. Because sure, we can digest when we sleep. Of course we digest when we sleep because most of us poop when we wake up in the morning, right? But if we have a lot of food, you guys know that like you feel kind of like bloated afterwards, and you might feel like a crash like in your energy levels, but like you know that your body is working really hard. That's because it's trying to digest all of that food, and it's trying to do that whole insulin IGF-1 pathway and get that thing going. So if you do that right before you go to sleep, it's going to disturb your sleep significantly. That kind of intuitively makes sense, but what Crosby et al. Also found, which I think is super, super interesting, is that secreting IGF-1 actually stimulates something called a clock protein. So clock proteins, not to get too crazy here, but clock proteins basically regulate our circadian rhythm. Essentially, when IGF-1 gets spiked, like after we have a huge meal, those clock proteins get upregulated, and it kind of like makes our body go crazy. Our body's like, we don't know if it's day or night. We don't know if we should be awake or not because we just ate a bunch of food. So now we're supposed to like burn that food off, but now you're trying to go to sleep. So now we don't understand. Basically, you're just working against your biological clock, your circadian rhythm. And anytime you do that, you're gonna disrupt your sleep. So what you wanna try to do is avoid food at all costs for like at least an hour and a half before bed, but you really wanna avoid heavy meals 2 to 3 hours before sleep. The reason I don't recommend not eating at all for 3 to 4 hours like a lot of people do before you go to bed is because as someone who has insomnia, I know that on the flip side, if I go to bed hungry, I'm not gonna fall asleep. So there have been times where like I lay down, I've brushed my teeth, I'm going to sleep, everything's good, but I'm starving because I haven't eaten in like 5 hours. I will have to get up and go eat like a cracker or go eat like a spoonful of peanut butter, and then I can go to sleep. So I always recommend that you have like a little something like an apple or a piece of toast or some cereal or something like that right before you go to bed. But right before you go to bed, by what I mean by that is an hour to an hour and a half. All right, and then my last tip, number 5, is to start experimenting with herbs. I love herbs and adaptogens. I think that they're great. I'm not talking about pot, and I'm not talking about any illegal drugs or anything like that. All I'm talking about are things like basil. Really crazy stuff here, people. We're talking about basil. No, but things like holy basil, which is also called tulsi, things like ashwagandha and maca, all of these are adaptogens, and it's a whole world that, to be honest with you, I am not super familiar with. I'm only familiar with it because my doctor is familiar with it. She's certified, she's a clinician. So she has given me a lot of adaptogens and herbs to help support my adrenal glands, to help support my gut. All of those things have helped me a lot. So I would definitely say to like lower your consumption of coffee, which is really hard because I love coffee, so I know that it's hard to get rid of it completely, but try to like stop drinking coffee at 11 or 12 p.m. and start having herbs throughout the day. You can have herbs that do anything. Basically, what adaptogens are is they adapt to what your body needs. Herbs have the ability to adapt to what our bodies need. So when we have things like essential oils, which you guys know I'm super big on, if you have things like herbal teas and stuff like that, even like mushrooms, all of those things basically like have a bunch of different functions, and they help our bodies in different ways depending on what we personally need. All right, guys, that's all for this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and comment down below with any other sleep tips that you have that you can share with the class. All right, bye.